saw it at 6:10, just before the sky started going gray at the edges. It was already 100 meters into open desert, moving away from the road, and my first thought was, that is a person. My second thought, arriving maybe 2 seconds later as my headlights tracked it. No, it isn't. It was bipedal. It was upright. It was wearing something dark, civilian clothing by the silhouette. The arms were swinging in opposition to the legs, the way a person's arms swing when they walk, the way you don't think about because it's automatic. But the timing was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, fractionally wrong, a half beat behind, like the motion had been copied from a recording and the sync was slightly off. I sat in that truck for a long time after it disappeared into the dark. I have seen it 5 times now. It's getting better at it. My name is Tomas Reinholt. I am a corporal with Border Patrol, currently assigned to the Ajo Station in Pima County, Arizona. I have been running the Southern Corridor for 4 years. Before that, 2 years at Laredo, which is a different kind of hard. Before that, the Army, which is where I learned that most of what makes a job difficult is not the dramatic parts. It is the waiting between the dramatic parts, and the way the waiting changes you if you let it. Service Road 7 runs roughly east to west, through a section of the Sonoran Desert that looks, at night, like the surface of a planet that gave up on itself a long time ago. Hardpan caliche cut with dry arroyos, saguaro cactus that stand 30 feet tall and look, in the sweep of headlights, like people who have been standing in one place so long they forgot how to move. The road itself is unpaved for 11 of its 23 miles, and the dust it throws up coats the inside of your sinuses by the second hour of a shift and stays there until morning. I run this corridor on nights, 1800 to 0630, 12 hours in a Ford F250 with a spotlight mounted on the cab, and a radio that drops signal at 4 specific points along the route that dispatch has logged and stopped asking about. The work is what it is. Long stretches of nothing, punctuated by things that require your full attention, followed by more long stretches of nothing. You develop a relationship with the dark out here that you do not develop in cities. The dark in cities is incomplete. There is always a window lit somewhere, always a sound that means people. Out on SR7 at 0200, the dark is total and indifferent, and the only light in any direction is what you brought with you. I learned the rule from Sergeant Delgado during my 3rd week at Ajo Station. We were doing a joint corridor run, training rotation, 2 trucks running parallel routes and checking in every 40 minutes. Delgado was a 15-year veteran, compact and precise, the kind of man who communicated in the fewest words the situation required and not one more. We had stopped at the SR7 and Vamori Road junction to swap notes when he brought it up. Not because anything had happened, just because it was time for me to know. Do not stop for abandoned vehicles at night, he said, regardless of condition, regardless of what you see inside them. I asked him why. He looked at the junction marker for a moment, the way people look at something nearby when they are deciding how to answer a question about something else entirely. The vehicles are sometimes not as abandoned as they appear, he said. That was it. No follow-up offered. The tone made clear that none would be entertained. I wrote it down in my field notebook that night, under a heading I labeled Standing Orders, because that is what it functioned as, even if it would never appear in any official documentation I was ever handed. For 4 years I followed that rule without once finding it strange. It sat alongside the other institutional knowledge of the corridor. The 4 dead radio points, the water cache locations left by humanitarian groups near mile marker 19, the specific way the heat shimmer off the asphalt at 0200 can resolve into shapes that are not there if you stare at it long enough. Abstract knowledge, professional knowledge, the kind you accumulate and apply without examining too closely. because examining it too closely is not what the job requires. That changed on a Thursday morning in October at mile marker 31, when I stopped the truck and got out and put a field tape measure against tracks in the sand that could not have been made by anything I had a name for. But I am getting ahead of myself. The rule came first. The rule always comes first out here. It is only when the rule finally makes sense that you understand you should have been afraid of it all along. The Thursday in question started the way most of my shifts start. I signed out the F250 at 1750, ran the pre-op check in the Ajo station lot while the last of the daylight went orange behind the Growler Mountains, and picked up Specialist Yara Okonkwo at the equipment bay at 1815. Okonkwo had been at Ajo 14 months at that point, transferred from the Del Rio sector in Texas, where she had done 3 years on the river corridor. She was 28, methodical, and had the particular quality I have always valued most in a partner. She did not fill silence with noise. We could run 4 hours of corridor without speaking, and neither of us found it strange. That kind of partner is rarer than people think. We cleared the station at 1823 and headed south on SR7 as the last light died. The first 6 hours were standard. When we logged 2 groups of footprints crossing the hardpan near mile marker 14, photographed them, called them in to dispatch. At mile marker 8, we found a water jug cache that had been disturbed, contents spilled, the plastic containers scattered in a 30-foot radius. Animal, most likely. We logged it and kept moving. Okonkwo ate a granola bar somewhere around midnight and offered me half without looking up from the window. I took it. That was the most eventful exchange we had before 0213. The white pickup was at mile marker 31 on the east shoulder when we came around the long curve that opens up the straight northern section of the route. My headlights caught it from about 200 meters out, and I reduced speed from 35 miles per hour to 15 without thinking about it. The reduction was automatic. 4 years of this corridor will do that. A mid-2010 Chevrolet Silverado, I estimated, extended cab, white over silver trim. The kind of truck that is common enough in southern Arizona that you stop registering them in daylight. At night, on an empty road shoulder at 0213, it registered differently. No plates visible from my approach angle. Driver door closed. No interior light, no hazard lights, no running lights, nothing. The front right tire had sunk perhaps 2 inches into the soft shoulder sand, which told me the truck had been there long enough for the weight to settle. More than an hour, possibly several. I ran my spotlight across it as we passed. No occupant in the driver's seat, no occupant visible in the rear seats. The bed was empty. A crack ran across the lower corner of the rear window, old damage, unrepaired. I kept moving at 15 miles per hour until we cleared the vehicle by 100 meters, then brought us back to 35. Okonkwo said nothing. I checked my mirror, and she was watching the pickup through the rear glass, her reflection in the window expressionless and still. She watched it until the road curved and it disappeared from view. And then she turned back to her side window and looked at the desert. I opened my patrol log on the dash-mounted tablet and entered the notation. Vehicle, white Chevrolet pickup, approximately 2010 to 2015. SR 7 mile marker 31 east shoulder, 0213. No occupant observed. No plates visible from approach, hazard lights off, right front tire settled in shoulder sand, continuing patrol. Standard entry. I have made that entry, or something close to it, dozens of times on this corridor. At 0231, my radio crackled, and Sergeant Calvo's voice came through from Ajo Station Dispatch. Calvo ran nights at the station 3 days a week and had a voice like gravel and institutional patience. He asked for a status update on the northern section. Quiet so far, I told him. Footprints near 14. Water cache disturbance near 8. One abandoned vehicle at 31. Nothing active. Copy that, Calvo said. Weather service is showing some wind coming in from the west after 0400. Might kick up dust on the open sections. Understood, I said. The radio went quiet. The road went quiet. Okonkwo had her elbow on the windowsill and was watching the saguaro stand at attention in the peripheral wash of my headlights. The night did what the night does out here, which is mostly nothing, for a long time. We reached the eastern terminus of our route at 4:08. I turned around and began the return leg. I want to be precise about what I was thinking when we approached mile marker 31 on the return at 0614. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, that flat gray that comes before color. And I was thinking about the shift handover at 0700 and whether the day crew had remembered to restock the water in the equipment bay. I was not thinking about the white pickup. I had logged it, noted it, moved past it, and filed it in the category of things that had a probable explanation I did not need to pursue. Then we came around the curve, and the shoulder at mile marker 31 was empty. Not empty with the truck gone and nothing remaining. Empty the way a place is empty when something has just left it. The sand on the shoulder held the tire impressions clearly, the 4 shallow rectangles where the wheels had rested, the right front one deeper than the rest. The truck had been there. Now it wasn't. Okonkwo sat forward in her seat. I stopped the truck. In the sand beside the impressions, on the passenger side, where the door would have been, there was something that did not belong to any vehicle or any wind or any animal I could account for. There were tracks. I got out of the truck before I made a conscious decision to do so. That is the most honest way I can describe it. 4 years on this corridor had built a reflex for anything that required physical documentation. And that reflex moved my hand to the door handle and my boots onto the shoulder sand before the analytical part of my brain had finished forming an opinion about whether it was a good idea. Okonkwo was out on her side a half-second after me. She had her phone up already, camera open, moving around the rear of the truck to get an angle on the tire impressions before she even looked at the tracks. That was Okonkwo. She processed situations by documenting them. It was the right instinct. The tracks began at the edge of the passenger side tire impression and ran due south from there in a straight line that I could follow with my eyes until the pre-dawn gray swallowed them at the limit of my vision. Bipedal. 2-footed. The individual impressions were elongated, consistent with a boot or shoe sole, and they were deep, pressed into the shoulder sand with a force that suggested significant mass bearing down through each step. I went back to the truck and got my field tape from the equipment bag behind the driver's seat. I measured the first stride. The distance from the heel of one impression to the heel of the next was 1.4 meters. I measured the second stride. 1.4 meters. I measured the third, 1.4 meters. I crouched there with the tape in my hands and looked at the number for a moment. The average adult male stride length is somewhere between 0.7 and 0.8 meters. A tall man, moving fast, pushing his gait, might reach 0.9 or even 1.0. These were 1.4, stride for stride, without variation, without the slight asymmetry that living things produce when they move, because no living thing is perfectly bilateral and no terrain is perfectly flat. These were identical, each one. What does that come out to? Okonkwo said from behind me. She was crouching over the third impression, her phone aimed down at it. About 40% longer than human average, I said. She didn't say anything to that. She took 3 more photographs. I stood and followed the track line with my spotlight, walking south along the shoulder to where the tracks left the packed sand and continued onto the open desert hardpan. The impressions got slightly shallower as the substrate changed from soft shoulder sand to compacted caliche, but they did not disappear. They continued in the same straight line, same stride, same depth relative to the surface, due south without a single degree of deviation. No return tracks. I walked the shoulder in both directions, looking for a second set, a set coming back to the road from the desert, and there was nothing. Whatever had made these tracks had come from inside the vehicle and walked into open desert and had not come back. The pressed depth was the other thing. I have documented animal tracks on this corridor for 4 years. Deer, javelina, coyote, the occasional black bear moving through from the mountains to the east. I know what mass looks like in sand. The depth of these impressions was inconsistent with the stride length in a way that I kept trying to resolve and couldn't. Something heavy enough to press that deep into shoulder sand would have to be moving to produce a stride of 1.4 meters. And something moving fast enough to produce a stride of 1.4 meters would distribute its weight differently and press less deeply. The two data points did not reconcile. I followed the track line with the spotlight until the beam lost resolution at approximately 150 meters from the road. At the edge of the light, I saw it. It was moving away from me, already far out into the open desert, and it walked the way something walks when it has finished doing something and is leaving. With the unhurried efficiency of completed purpose. I stood at the shoulder edge with the spotlight trained on it, and I watched it move, and I did not move myself for a long time. Okonkwo came up beside me. She looked at what I was looking at, and she went very still. Neither of us said anything. The figure moved south. The desert was flat and open in that direction for 20 miles before the next significant terrain feature. It moved into that flatness, and the light gave out, and it was gone. The spotlight on the F-250 has a throw of roughly 150 meters on flat terrain. I know this because I have tested it. The way you test equipment you depend on. Standing at measured distances in the station lot after dark and marking where the beam loses definition. 150 meters is where a human face becomes a pale smear. 170 is where a human figure becomes a shape. Beyond that, you have outline and movement and nothing else. The figure was at approximately 100 meters when I first picked it up. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because the temptation when you are telling a story like this one is to reach for language that signals to the listener how they should feel. I am going to resist that. I am going to tell you what I saw the way I would enter it in a log if I were going to enter it in a log, which I was not. Upright. Bipedal. Moving due south, away from the road, away from the tire impressions and the tracks in the sand. Clothed in dark material, what appeared to be a jacket and trousers, civilian cut. The figure was tall, difficult to estimate precisely at distance, but the proportions read as adult male. The arms were swinging in opposition to the legs in the correct biomechanical pattern. Right arm forward with left leg, left arm forward with right leg, the standard human gait compensation that most people perform for their entire lives without once thinking about it. At 100 meters, in the wash of the spotlight, it looked like a person. I kept the beam on it. Okonkwo had gone completely still in the passenger seat, her granola bar wrapper folded in her hands, not moving. Neither of us said anything. 30 seconds in, I understood what was wrong. It was the timing, not the motion itself, which was correct, but the interval between the motion and what the motion was responding to. When a person walks, the arm swing is involuntary, neurological, wired into the locomotion at a level below conscious control. It happens simultaneously with the stride, not after it. The arm moves because the leg moves in the same instant as part of the same signal. This was different by a fraction, a half beat. The legs would commit to a stride and then, slightly behind, the arms would follow. as if the system governing the arms was receiving the information from the legs rather than sharing the source, as if the coordination had been learned by watching rather than by doing. The desert is very good at showing you things that are almost right. Heat shimmer, shadow play, the way a saguaro at the edge of your headlights can resolve into a silhouette that your brain, for one lurching second, processes as a man with his arms raised. I have been fooled by this corridor before. I know what the desert does to your perception after 6 hours of night driving. This was not that. I watched for 90 seconds. I know it was 90 seconds because I was watching the dashboard clock without deciding to. The way you anchor yourself to something measurable when the thing you are looking at does not have a category. The figure did not look back. It did not slow. It did not deviate from its line, which was dead straight south. No adjustment for the terrain, no slight drift left or right the way people drift when they walk without a fixed visual reference. It moved the way something moves when it is not navigating. When it already knows exactly where it is going, and the path between here and there is a formality. At 90 seconds, it walked past the threshold where the spotlight could hold it, and the desert took it, and it was gone. Okonkwo let out a breath. Not a word, just a breath, slow and controlled, the kind you release when you have been holding it without realizing. I turned the spotlight off. We sat in the dark for a moment. Outside, the sky to the east had gone from black to a deep gray blue, the first suggestion of morning. The desert was completely silent. "Did you get a good look?" I said. It was not really a question. She took a second before she answered. "I got a look," she said. I nodded. I reached for the radio handset and held it for a moment without keying it. There was a protocol for reporting a sighting of a person in open desert. I knew the protocol. I had followed it 11 times on this corridor for 11 separate individuals or groups, called in coordinates, waited for the response unit, done the paperwork. The protocol existed for a clear and specific purpose. A person in open desert at night, without water in October, has perhaps 8 hours before the situation becomes a recovery operation rather than a rescue. I held the handset for a long time. Then I put it back in the mount without keying it. Okonkwo watched me do this. She did not comment. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road and started toward Ayo Station. The sun was beginning to threaten the horizon behind us. The saguaro came back into visibility one by one as the light built, resuming their positions like something caught moving that had decided to hold still. I thought about Sergeant Delgado at the Vamori Road junction, not looking at me when he delivered the rule, looking at the junction marker instead. The vehicles are sometimes not as abandoned as they appear. I had written it under standing orders in my field notebook. I had been 23. I had treated it the way you treat institutional knowledge passed down through a chain of command, as a thing that had a reason even if the reason was not being shared. And your job was to follow it and not require the reason to be explained. I understood now why the reason was never explained. Because the explanation was exactly this. This drive back along SR7 in the gray early light, with the number 1.4 meters sitting in my head like a stone I could not put down, and Okonkwo asleep against the passenger window, and the rule finally making a different kind of sense than it had made before. Not policy sense, not procedural sense, the other kind, the kind that stays with you. In the weeks that followed, I would learn that one sighting on one morning was not an anomaly. It was an introduction. The second sighting was 19 days after the first. Altar Valley Road runs north to south through a stretch of desert that feels, even by the standards of this corridor, particularly empty. No landmark structures, no water cache markers, Just caliche flats and dry brush and the occasional dirt track branching off toward nothing visible. I was running it alone that night, a solo patrol rotation covering for Okonkwo, who had traded shifts with another specialist. The date was the 4th of November. The time was 0340. The blue sedan was a Honda Civic, late 1990s model. Faded paint that had once been blue and was now the color of something that had spent too many summers in direct sun. It was on the west shoulder with the engine off and both rear doors open, which was unusual. Open doors on an abandoned vehicle generally mean a hurried exit. I slowed to 12 miles per hour and ran my spotlight across it. No occupant. Registration sticker on the rear plate was expired by 14 months. A child's sneaker was visible on the rear seat. One sneaker, no pair. I kept moving. I logged it. I did not stop. I was 3 miles south when I turned around, which I told myself was because I wanted to take another pass at the plate number and better spotlight angle. That was partially true. On the return, the sedan was still there, and at the edge of the arroyo that cuts across Alter Valley Road at approximately the half-mile mark north of the vehicle, the figure was standing at the lip of the drop, partially below road grade, visible from the chest up. Same dark clothing, same height. It was facing south, perpendicular to my approach, not looking at me. I stopped at 60 meters and watched. 40 seconds by the clock. Then it stepped down into the arroyo and was gone, and the arroyo was dark and still. And I sat there for a while before I drove back to the Iho station in a silence that had a different quality than the usual kind. The third sighting came 11 days after that, on SR-12 north of the Tohono-O'odham Nation boundary. A Jeep, older model, no doors, which in this part of Arizona is common enough that it barely registers in daylight. Engine cold. It had been there a long time. 2 other patrol units were running routes within 3 miles of my position that night. I know this because I could hear specialists Garza and Mendenhall checking in with Calvo on the radio at regular intervals, their voices carrying the specific boredom of a quiet shift. Neither of them reported anything. Neither of them, when I checked in the following week without asking directly, gave any indication they had seen what I saw at the tree line 60 meters off SR-12 at 0155. The figure briefly, moving between 2 large Palo Verde trees at the edge of my headlight range, and then not there. I said nothing to Garza. I said nothing to Mendenhall. The 4th sighting was not a vehicle. It was a pair of shoes. Brown leather work boots, men's size 10 or 11, placed at the east shoulder of SR-7 near mile marker 24. Placed is the right word. They were together, aligned, toes pointing toward the road, the way you set shoes down when you are being deliberate about it. Okonkwo was back as my partner. She saw them the same moment I did, and we both looked without speaking. I stopped the truck and put the spotlight on them. No tracks in the sand leading to the shoes. Only tracks leading away, beginning from the point where the shoes sat, as if whatever had been wearing them had simply ceased to require them and walked on without. Same stride, same depth, same dead straight line south into open desert. We sat with the spotlight on those shoes for a long time. I don't know what to do with that, Okonkwo said finally. Neither do I said. We drove on. I did not log the shoes. I did not log the tracks. I photographed both on my personal phone, the same phone I had used to photograph the tire impressions at mile marker 31 19 days earlier. Corporal Luis Ferreira had been at Ajo Station 6 years when I arrived, which made him the longest-serving active patrol on the southern corridor at that point. But he ran the western section, the stretch between Lukeville and the Organ Pipe boundary, which was a harder route in some ways and quieter in others. He was 41, built like someone who had never stopped doing the physical work, and he had a quality that I had noticed early on and come to respect. He never offered information, but if you asked the right question, he would not lie to you. I found him in the station break room on a Tuesday morning after shift change. Sitting at the corner table with a cup of coffee he was not drinking, looking out the window at the equipment yard. I sat down across from him and told him what I had seen. Not all of it. Enough of it. The tracks, the figure, the timing that was wrong in the way I had described to no one, except Okonkwo. Ferreira listened without looking at me. He kept his eyes on the equipment yard and held his coffee cup in both hands the way people hold something warm when they are deciding what to do with a conversation. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been logging it?" he said. "I'm not," I said. "Not officially." He nodded once, slowly, as if that were the correct answer to a question he already knew. "You should keep it somewhere," he said. He paused. "Somewhere that isn't the official record." That was all he said. He looked back at the equipment yard. He drank his coffee. After a while, he stood up and took his cup to the sink and rinsed it and left the break room without looking back. I drove home that morning and sat at my kitchen table and opened the drawer where I keep the things that don't have a better place. Take-out menus, a spare key to my truck, a legal pad I had bought 6 months ago for reasons I no longer remembered. I pulled the legal pad out and opened it to the first page. I wrote the date. I wrote mile marker 31. I wrote 1.4 meters and underlined it once. Then I kept writing. I wrote everything I had not logged. The blue sedan on Alter Valley Road with the child's sneaker on the rear seat. The figure at the Arroyo Lip facing south. The Jeep on SR12 with the cold engine. The shoes at mile marker 24 with their toes pointed toward the road, like they were waiting for someone to come back for them. I wrote the way Ferreira had held his coffee cup and looked at the equipment yard while I talked, and how that had told me more than anything he had said. I wrote until the morning light came through the kitchen window and my coffee went cold. Then I closed the pad, so put it back in the drawer and went to bed. I was not done filling it, not even close. What I did not know then, lying in the dark with the legal pad in the drawer 10 feet away, was that the pattern I had been observing and recording was about to change. Not gradually, not with warning. The way things change out here in the desert, which is all at once, without announcement, leaving you to understand afterward that the signs were there the whole time, and you simply had not known yet what they were signs of. The night everything shifted began, like most nights on this corridor, with a vehicle on a road shoulder. But this one was running. Every previous sighting had followed the same structure. A vehicle, already still, already cold, already done with whatever purpose had brought it to this corridor. And somewhere in the dark beyond it, the figure, already leaving, already in the process of becoming something the desert would swallow before I could form a complete thought about what I was seeing. The vehicle was always the past tense of something. The figure was always the afterword. The gray van at mile marker 28 on the night of November 7th was neither of those things. It was present tense. It was running. We picked it up at 01:45, coming around the gradual bend that opens onto the long, flat section of SR7 between markers 26 and 31. A Dodge Caravan, mid-2000s, gray, driver door hanging open at roughly 90 degrees. The interior cabin light was on, or casting a pale, yellow rectangle onto the road shoulder that was visible from 200 meters out. I registered the light before I registered the vehicle, which tells you how dark that section of road is on a moonless night. I reduced to 12 miles per hour and put my spotlight on it. The engine was running. I could see the exhaust at the rear, faint in the cool air, a slow pulse of vapor that meant the vehicle was idling rather than sitting dead. And in the driver's seat, visible through the open door, there was a figure. It was seated, upright, facing forward, toward the road, toward us. Dark jacket, the hood up. The hands were in the lap or near it, not on the wheel. The posture was the posture of someone who had stopped for a moment and had not yet decided whether to continue. Okonkwo made a sound that was not quite a word. I kept moving at 12 miles per hour. We passed the van at 50 meters of lateral distance, and I kept my spotlight on the figure in the driver's seat as we went by. The figure did not turn, did not react to the light, sat with the same forward orientation, hands in the lap, hood up, engine idling. Standard protocol for an occupied vehicle was to stop, approach, identify. I did not stop. Okonkwo said nothing. I said nothing. The van passed out of my mirror, and the road ahead was empty and dark. At mile marker 22, I slowed the truck and sat with my hands on the wheel. I had never turned around before. The rule was directional in my understanding of it. You kept moving. You did not engage. You did not stop. Turning around and returning to a vehicle was a different category of action. One, and I had never been in a situation that tested whether the rule covered it, because every previous vehicle had been empty and cold and already finished. This one had someone in it. I turned around. I want to be honest about what I was thinking on the drive back. I was thinking about the window of the Ajo station break room and Ferreira looking through it at the equipment yard while he held his coffee cup. I was thinking about the shoes at mile marker 24 with their toes aligned toward the road. I was thinking about a lot of things. And somewhere underneath all of them, I was thinking about the shape in the driver's seat and the way it had not moved when the spotlight hit it. And how that stillness had felt less like the stillness of a person and more like the stillness of something that did not yet know it was supposed to react. The van was still there at mile marker 28, still running. Driver door still open at 90 degrees, interior light still on. I stopped the truck at 50 meters back and put the spotlight directly on the driver's seat. The figure was still there. Same posture, same hood, same forward orientation. Then, slowly, it turned its head and looked into the light. The face was in shadow under the hood. I could not make out features. What I could make out was the movement itself, the arc of the head turning toward the source of the light. And I can tell you with precision what was wrong about it, because I have replayed it enough times in enough quiet moments that I know it the way I know the 4 dead radio points on this corridor. It was late, not dramatically late, a half beat. The spotlight had been on the figure for approximately 3 seconds before the head began to turn, which is 2 seconds longer than a person takes to react to a light source aimed directly at them. And the turn itself was smooth and continuous and perfectly paced, the way a movement is smooth when it has been calculated rather than felt. No flinch, no narrowing against the brightness, no hand coming up to shade the eyes. Just the head, rotating at a controlled speed toward the light, stopping when it was aimed directly at me, and then holding. We sat like that for 4 minutes. I watched the clock. Okonkwo had her hand on the door handle, not gripping it, just resting there, the way you rest your hand on something solid when the ground feels uncertain. "Don't," I said. "I know," she said. At 4 minutes and approximately 20 seconds, the van's engine cut. Clean stop, not a sputter or a wind down, just off. The way you cut an engine with a key. The interior cabin light went out simultaneously, and the road shoulder went dark except for my spotlight, and the faint residual glow of the van's instrument panel fading. I waited 30 seconds. Then I put the truck in gear and rolled forward slowly, keeping the spotlight on the driver's seat. The driver's seat was empty. The door was still open at 90 degrees. The engine was off. The seat was empty. There was no one in the vehicle. No one behind the vehicle. No one visible in the desert on either side. I rolled past at 8 miles per hour with my window down and my spotlight moving across every surface of the van I could reach. Empty rear seats, empty cargo area, a fast food bag on the passenger floor, a water bottle in the cup holder, the detritus of a vehicle that had been used by a person until it wasn't anymore. I did not stop. I did not get out. I drove the remaining section of the route in a silence that Okonkwo did not break, and I did not invite her to break. We checked in with Calvo at 02:30, and I gave him a routine status report in a voice that I kept at the same register I always used, which took more effort than it should have. When we pulled into Ajo Station at 06:38, and I handed off the truck to the day shift, I sat in the equipment bay for a moment before going inside. The van had been running. Someone had been in it. Something had been in it. The difference between those two sentences was the thing I was going to have to live with, and I knew it. And I drove home in the early light and sat at my kitchen table and opened the legal pad and wrote everything down before the details could soften at the edges the way things do when you give them time. What I found when I returned to mile marker 28 the following morning would make the writing harder, and the reading of it harder still. I went back to mile marker 28 the following morning at 09:15, off shift, in my personal vehicle, which was a thing I had never done before, and which I told myself was a one-time exception to a boundary I intended to maintain. The van was gone. The shoulder was clean. No tire impressions, no fluid stain from the idling engine, no disturbance in the shoulder sand that I could read as departure tracks. The road was empty in both directions, and the desert on either side held the particular silence of a place that has finished being interesting and is waiting for you to leave. I crouched at the shoulder edge and looked at the sand for a long time. There was a compressed area that might have been where the front right tire rested. Might have been. The wind that Calvo had warned about 2 weeks earlier had come and gone several times since, and the surface was disturbed enough that I could not make a definitive reading. I stood up. I photographed the shoulder from 3 angles on my personal phone. Then I drove to Ajo Station. Captain Merrill Voss had her office at the east end of the station building, a corner room with 2 windows, one facing the equipment yard and one facing the desert to the south. She had been the Ajo Station commander for 3 years, transferred from a joint intelligence coordination post in El Paso that nobody at the station discussed in any detail because Voss herself had never discussed it. She was 54, trim, with close-cropped gray hair and the specific quality of stillness that people develop when they have spent a long time in rooms where information is more dangerous than silence. She ran the station the way a careful person runs anything, by knowing more than she indicated and indicating only what was necessary. Her door was open. She looked up when I knocked on the frame. "Reinholt," she said, "you're off rotation." "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to come in." She gestured to the chair across from her desk without looking away from the document she was reading. I sat down. She finished the paragraph she was on, set the document to the side, and looked at me with the neutral attention of someone who had already decided this conversation was going to require care. "I've been reviewing the northern section logs," she said, "the past 6 weeks." I waited. "There are 2 incidents I expected to see documented that aren't there." She said it without accusation, the way you state a discrepancy in an inventory. A vehicle on Alter Valley Road, November 4th, and a second item at mile marker 24 on SR7, November 9th. Both nights you were on rotation. Both sections covered in your log with no notable entries for those time windows. I kept my face neutral. "I filed what I could support," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "That is the correct answer," she said. And the way she said it told me she had been waiting to hear whether I would give it. She folded her hands on the desk. "I want to tell you something," she said. "And I want you to understand I am telling you this in the capacity of a station commander managing a patrol corridor. not in any other capacity. Understood, I said. Some things on this corridor have a longer history than the current rotation, than the rotation before it. She paused, precisely. The way people pause when they are selecting the next word with care. The log is for what you can support with documentation and physical evidence. It is not for what you observe and cannot support. Those are two different categories, and the log is only equipped to handle one of them. She held my eyes for a moment after she said it, long enough that I understood she was not giving me instructions about record keeping. She was telling me she knew what I had seen. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She nodded once and picked up her document. I stood to leave. "Reinholt," she said, without looking up. I stopped. "Garrett Solis. 34 years old, Tucson. You'll find the missing persons report in the shared drive, filed 3 weeks ago by Pima County Sheriff's Office. His vehicle was recovered at SR 7-mile marker 31. She turned a page. "The case has been referred to the Joint Coordination Office. It is not our active file." She said nothing else. I waited a beat to be certain, and then I walked out. I found the report on the shared drive from the terminal in the break room. Garrett Solis, 34, construction estimator, reported missing by his wife, Dana Solis. On the 14th of October, after he did not return from a solo drive he had told her would take 2 hours. His vehicle, a white Chevrolet Silverado, mid-2010s, white over silver trim, was recovered at SR 7-mile marker 31 by a day shift patrol unit on the morning of the 15th. The front right tire had been partially sunk into the shoulder sand. I sat at the terminal and read the report twice. There was a photograph of Garrett Solis attached, the kind pulled from a driver's license or an employee file. He had a wide, open face and the look of someone who spent time outdoors without making a particular thing of it. Dark hair, slight sunburn across the nose. He looked like the kind of man you would pass in a hardware store and not remember, which is not a cruel observation. Most people look like that. It simply means they belong to their life completely, that nothing about them is preparing for something else. I thought about the white pickup at mile marker 31, the front right tire sunk into the sand. I thought about the tracks beginning at the passenger side door. I thought about the figure at 100 meters, moving south, arms a half beat behind. I closed the report. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote Garrett Solis's name in the legal pad, and his age, and the mile marker. And then I drew a line connecting it to the entry I had made 6 weeks earlier about the tire impressions in the sand. Then I made coffee and looked at the line for a long time. The desert at night does not answer questions. It simply continues being the desert, enormous and indifferent, doing whatever it does in the dark between the time you leave it and the time you return. I had been patrolling it for 4 years, and I still did not know what that was. I was about to find out. Specialist Denny Fitch called in sick at 17:42, 13 minutes before shift change, which gave dispatch exactly no time to find a replacement. I was already in the equipment bay, running the pre-op check on the F250 when Calvo's voice came over the station intercom asking me to come to the desk. "Fitch is out," Calvo said when I got there. He had the expression of a man managing a staffing problem at the end of a long day. Okonkwo is still on medical. I've got Garza and Mendenhall both running double shifts this week, and I can't pull either of them. He looked at me. "You've run solo twice before." "Against regulation," I said. "Against regulation," he agreed. He waited. I thought about telling him I would rather wait for a partner. I thought about the drive home, the kitchen table, the legal pad in the drawer. I thought about Garrett Solis's wide-open face on the shared drive terminal. "I'll run it," I said. Calvo nodded and handed me the clipboard. "Sign the variance." I signed it. He filed it without comment turned back to his desk, and that was the entire conversation about whether I should be alone on that corridor on the night of November 14th. I cleared the station at 1831 and headed south on SR 7. The first 7 hours were quiet in the specific way that night had been quiet since the October sightings, which was not the same as the quiet from before. Before October, the silence of this corridor was neutral. Professional silence, the silence of a job that required patience. After October, it had a different texture. A watchfulness that I could not locate in any specific stimulus, one that seemed to come from the road itself and the desert on either side of it, as if the landscape had become aware that I was paying a different kind of attention and was paying it back. I noted 2 sets of footprints near mile marker 9, photographed them, called them into Calvo at 2147. A coyote crossed the road at mile marker 17 and stopped in my headlights for a moment, assessed the truck with the calm pragmatism that coyotes bring to everything, and moved on. At 0130, I ate the sandwich I had packed and drank half a thermos of coffee that had gone lukewarm and watched the desert do nothing for 20 minutes. At 0220, I came around the curve at mile marker 33, and the white pickup was on the shoulder at mile marker 31. Same position, east shoulder, front right tire sunk slightly into the sand, driver door closed, no lights. I knew this vehicle. I knew the crack in the lower corner of the rear window. I knew the tire impression it left when it sat long enough for the weight to settle. I slowed to 8 miles per hour. I had been running this section at 35, and I dropped to 8 in the space of 100 meters, which was not the smooth professional deceleration I had managed in October. It was the deceleration of someone who was not going to let themselves pass this vehicle without looking at every surface of it. The spotlight hit it at 70 meters. Clean beam, full intensity. The truck was empty. Same as before, no occupant in the driver's seat, no occupant visible in the rear. The bed was empty. The details matched the vehicle from October the way a copy matches an original, closely enough that the difference, if there was one, was not something I could name. I moved the spotlight to the mirrors as I passed. The driver's side mirror was wrong. It was angled upward, maybe 15 degrees above the position that would give a driver the standard rear view. Not dramatically wrong, not wrenched out of alignment, just slightly elevated. The way a mirror sits when the person who last adjusted it was taller than the person who owned the vehicle, or when someone has adjusted it without being entirely certain what the correct position should look like. I kept moving, 8 miles per hour. I logged the vehicle in my patrol tablet with the same notation as before. The same mile marker, the same shoulder, no occupant observed. I did not log the mirror. At mile marker 18, the radio went silent. Not static. Not. I want to be precise about this because static is a known quantity on this corridor, and I have 4 documented dead points in my patrol log where the signal degrades to noise before recovering. This was not that. The radio simply stopped producing sound, the way a radio sounds when the volume is turned to 0. A clean absence rather than a degraded one. I checked the frequency. Correct channel. I switched to the backup frequency. Nothing. I checked the handset connection. Secure. I tried Calvo's direct line. Nothing. I drove to mile marker 15, which is the southern turnaround point on my route, and I sat there for 3 minutes trying every frequency I had access to and getting the same clean silence on all of them. The desert outside was dark and still. No wind, under the kind of night where sound carries a long way, and the absence of it means something. I turned around and started back north. At mile marker 25, the figure was standing at the road edge. I saw it in my headlights from 150 meters, and I knew immediately that this was different from every previous sighting because it was not moving away. It was facing me. It was standing at the east shoulder with its feet at the pavement edge and its body oriented toward the road, toward the oncoming headlights, toward me, in the posture of something that has been waiting and has now decided to stop waiting. I slowed to 5 miles per hour without deciding to. At 30 meters, I stopped. The headlights gave me full illumination at that distance. What I could see: human outline, correct proportions, dark clothing, a jacket and trousers that could have come from any civilian closet in any town in southern Arizona. The arms were at the sides, hanging still, not swinging. Every previous sighting, the arms had been swinging, doing the copied locomotion, performing the learned behavior of a walking human. Now they were still, and the stillness felt like a different mode, like something that had stopped performing and was simply present. The face was visible. I am not going to describe it in detail. I have tried to write a description of it in the legal pad 3 times and deleted it each time because the description I produce is always technically accurate and completely insufficient. And I would rather tell you it was wrong in a way I do not have the vocabulary for than give you a description that sounds manageable. Looked like a face the way the walking had looked like walking. Correct in its components. Incorrect in some aggregate quality that the components alone could not account for. It was looking at me. I sat at 30 meters for a time I did not measure on the clock because I was not capable of looking at the clock. The engine idled. The headlights held the figure in full illumination, and the figure did not move, and did not react to the light, and did not look away. Then it raised its right arm, slowly. Not a sudden movement, not a lunge or a threat. A slow and deliberate elevation of the right arm from the side of the body to approximately chest height. The elbow slightly bent, the hand open, the palm facing me. It moved the way something moves when it has rehearsed the movement and is executing the rehearsed version, and it stopped at chest height and held there. I do not know what it meant. I have thought about it every day since, and I do not know what it meant. I put the truck in reverse. I drove backward at 15 miles per hour in reverse gear, watching the figure in my headlights, watching it stand at the road edge with its arm raised, watching the distance between us grow from 30 meters to 50 to 100, watching it remain still and present in my headlights as the distance increased, until at 200 meters, it was a shape at the edge of illumination, with one arm extended. At mile marker 27, I turned the truck around. I drove to Idaho Station at 55 miles per hour on a road I normally run at 35, and I did not look in the mirrors. Not once. Not at mile marker 28, where the gray van had sat with its engine running. Not at mile marker 31, where the white pickup was sitting on the shoulder in the dark. I looked at the road ahead, and I drove, and I breathed, and I held the wheel with both hands, and I did not look in the mirrors. I pulled into the Idaho Station lot at 0318 and sat in the truck until my hands stopped being useful for gripping things. Then I went inside and poured coffee I did not drink and sat in the break room until Calvo came in at 0400 and asked me how the corridor was. "Quiet," I said. He nodded and poured his own coffee, and that was all. I drove home in the early dark before the dawn, and I sat at my kitchen table and I opened the legal pad, and I wrote everything down while it was still clean and sharp and before my brain could begin the work of making it into something I could live with more easily. It took a long time to write. When I finished, the kitchen window was going gray with the beginning of morning, and the neighbor's dog had started its daily complaint at something in the yard, and the ordinary world was reassembling itself around me the way it does, indifferent to what the night had contained. Everything was the same. The table, the coffee cup, the drawer with the legal pad in it, sitting open. Nothing was the same. That is the thing about this corridor that nobody tells you in orientation. That Delgado did not tell me at the Vamori Road junction. That Ferreira did not tell me over his coffee cup in the break room. That Voss did not tell me in her office with her hands folded on the desk. You do not get to unknow what you know out here. You carry it the way you carry your sidearm, always present, always weighted at your side. When after a while you stop noticing the weight and start noticing instead the days when you leave it behind. because those days feel wrong now in a way they never did before. I went to bed. I slept 4 hours. I got up and made coffee and looked at the legal pad on the table where I had left it. Then I got ready for my shift. Two weeks after the night at mile marker 25, I'm sitting at my kitchen table in Ajo at 07:30 with a cup of coffee and the legal pad open in front of me. The window facing east is doing what it does at this hour, letting in the flat early light that makes everything in the kitchen look provisional, like a set that has not finished being built. The neighbor's dog, a beagle named something I've never learned, started its morning complaint at 06:30 and ran for 11 minutes and then stopped, which is what it does every morning with the reliability of a scheduled event. I have started using it as a clock. When the dog stops, it is approximately 06:41, and I have roughly 50 minutes before I need to start getting ready for shift. I use the 50 minutes for the legal pad. There are 6 entries in it now. I have read them back this morning the way I read them back most mornings, not looking for anything new, just maintaining the record, keeping it accurate in my memory the way you keep a route accurate, so that if something changes, you will know what it changed from. The first entry is dated the 16th of October, mile marker 31. The tire impressions in the shoulder sand. The tracks beginning at the passenger side door, stride length 1.4 meters, pressed deep, running due south without deviation. The figure at the edge of the spotlight, moving away. I wrote that entry in the early morning after my shift, still in my uniform, handwriting less controlled than usual because my hands had not entirely settled yet. I read it now, and it seems like a document from a different investigation. Not because the details have changed, they haven't, but because I understand now that it was a beginning. And beginnings look different once you can see what they began. The 7th entry is for the night of November 14th. I have been putting it off. Not because I don't remember it clearly. I remember it with the specific fidelity of things that do not soften with time. But because writing it means choosing words for things I have not yet found adequate words for. And I am precise enough about language to find that uncomfortable. I write for accuracy. I write so that the record is clean and readable and cannot be misunderstood by someone coming to it without context. The entry for November 14th is going to test that, because some of what happened on that night does not have a clean and readable version. I write it anyway. I write about the white pickup at mile marker 31, with the mirror angled wrong, the radio going silent at mile marker 18. I write the return leg, the figure at the road edge, facing the road, facing me. I write the distance and the lighting conditions and the duration with the same precision I use for everything else, because precision is the only tool I have, and I am going to use it even when it is insufficient. I write about the arm. I write, right arm elevated slowly from the side to approximately chest height, elbow slightly bent, palm facing toward the vehicle, held in that position for the duration of observation. I do not write what I think it meant because I do not know what it meant, and the log is not for speculation. The log is for what I can support. I put the pen down and read the entry back. It is accurate. It is insufficient. It is the best I can do. My phone buzzes on the table. I pick it up. It is a text from Okonkwo. She has been on medical leave for 3 weeks now, a knee issue from a trail descent near the organ pipe boundary that has her on restricted activity and clearly climbing the walls. She texts me every few days with questions about the corridor that are patrol questions on the surface and something else underneath. Her message this morning says, "How has the northern section been?" I look at it for a moment. I type back, "Quiet." Then I send it and set the phone down. There is a second question underneath that message. The same second question that has been underneath every message she has sent since she went on leave. and I have not answered it in any of them. Not because I do not know the answer, but because the answer belongs in the legal pad and not in a text message. And because Okonkwo is still on medical leave, and the corridor will be waiting for her when she gets back, and there is no version of answering the second question that makes her return to this road easier. She will come back. She will run the corridor again. She will see what there is to see out here, the way she has always seen it, steady and without drama, her hand resting on the door handle in the moments when the ground feels uncertain. When that happens, I will show her the legal pad. She has earned that. I close the pad and look at it on the table. It is a standard legal pad, yellow, the kind you find in any office supply aisle in any town in America. I bought it at the Walgreens on Solano Avenue in Ajo 6 months ago for reasons I could not have explained at the time. There are 43 pages left. I am not sure that will be enough. I used to leave it in the drawer under the table with the takeout menus and the spare truck key and the things that did not have a better place. It lived there between entries, and I would take it out when I needed it and put it back when I was done. And that felt like the right relationship to have with it. Contained, managed, put away when not in use. I do not leave it in the drawer anymore. I take it with me now. It rides in the interior pocket of my patrol jacket on every shift, and I am aware of its weight there the way I am aware of my sidearm, as a thing I carry because the alternative is going out onto that corridor without it, and I have stopped being willing to do that. I get up from the table and rinse my coffee cup and set it on the drying rack. I put on my uniform. I check my sidearm and holster it. I pick up the legal pad from the table and slide it into the interior pocket of my jacket and feel it settle against my ribs. The neighbor's dog has been quiet for 49 minutes. I pick up my keys and walk out to the truck. The corridor is waiting. It is always waiting. I drive south. If what Thomas is recording in that legal pad sounds like something you recognize, something you have seen at the edge of your headlights, or heard described in a tone that closed the door on follow-up questions, the comment section is open. These accounts do not stay buried when enough people start comparing notes. If this story kept you watching to the end, subscribe. There are more corridors, more rules nobody wrote down, more figures at the edge of the light that are getting better at what they are practicing. The next one is already being logged.